Metazoa Snapshot is a comprehensive org management solution to help maintain, manage, clean up, and optimize your Salesforce orgs. Visual workspaces with intuitive tools help to reduce complexity and simplify workflow. Just drag, drop, and connect. Optimize your org and lower the total cost of ownership by identifying which assets are used the least and cleaning up unused fields and metadata. Quickly restore metadata in disaster recovery situations by scheduling automated backups or taking snapshots on demand. Easily manage releases and migrate metadata and data between sandbox and production environments while automatically recording deployment history. Visualize profiles and permission sets with mass edit and user assignment capabilities. Compare differences in metadata between orgs and over time, and set notifications to trigger alerts when changes occur. Detailed reporting makes it easy to compare user profiles and manage permission sets across multiple orgs. Reduce complexity with comprehensive org management from Metazoa Snapshot for Salesforce.
We were just a bunch of nerdy kids who ignored the haters. We took their ridicule and we built on it. And when some of us gave up, well, we built on that too. Built resilience, built on a mission to make things a little better every day until the users came. Then the haters were VCs who scoffed at our audacity. This just isn't the way things are done. But we kept building. Users turned into teams, turned into companies, running their entire businesses on our apps. Then the software giants came after us. We weren't proven, we weren't fully featured, our radical cloud model wasn't secure. But we built on. And today, as companies adopt the cloud to move faster, teams are finding themselves slowed down by each other's efforts. The skeptics are claiming we'll never develop innovation at scale. But now, DevOps have come to the cloud, ushering in a new era of transformation. Companies can release on demand across hundreds of environments, innovating faster with fewer conflicts and fewer disruptions. There will always be challenges. There will always be naysayers. And we'll build on.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending upon your location. Thank you very much for joining Virtual Dreamin 2020. I am your host, Aditya Shahi, and we have Jay Stedman with us to talk about the dawn of click and code.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Jay Stedman, and welcome to From Admin to Automator, also known as the dawn of clicks and code. A little bit about me. Hello, I am Jay Stedman. I am a 13-time certified senior solutions engineer at Salesforce. I started in the Salesforce space about 8 years ago, and I became really passionate over the course of my 8 years in the technology in trying to help others learn how to move from kind of a standard administrator position into something that's a little bit closer to app development using our declarative tools. About 8 years ago, I was starting my first office job. At 30 years old, I was a receptionist. I had never touched Salesforce before. And now I'm actually helping some of our largest retail and consumer goods clients take a look at how they can build apps on our platform in a declarative way. My perspective on this is if I can do it, anyone can do it. And I'm really excited to be here with you today to kind of share some of my tips and my tricks. So here's our agenda for the session today. We're going to start with what we're talking about and why we're talking about it. I've got a few definitions that I want to review with you about what an administrator is and what an automator is. And then today is really about talking through the soft skills that I think are important to become an automator, as well as reviewing the hard technical skills and which tools you'll need to use within the Salesforce platform to do that effectively. A note about Q&A. If you have questions at any time, post them. And I'm happy to answer questions at any time. I'm flexible, so we don't have to reserve our Q&A to the end. So I'll rely on my co-host here to help me out. If a question pops up, just stop me. I'm pretty verbose, so just shout me down. Let me know that there's a question, and let's address that question as it pops up. I'd really like to have this session feel more like a conversation than a lecture. And I feel like one of the easiest ways to do that is to review our questions as we move through, as opposed to holding them all until the end. So let's move into the what and the why. So during this session, we're going to be reviewing the skills necessary to become an automator, right? We want to think about moving from kind of a production administrator where we're supporting our end users, doing user provisioning and things of that nature, and moving more into declarative app development. The reason why we're doing that is because it can be hard to know how to build these skills. We've got Trailhead, and we've got tons of resources that are available to us, but it can be really challenging to know where to start or what to do, especially because these things are so easy to access. If you want to begin automating, you can create a workflow rule, you can create a process builder, you can create a flow. It's really easy to start, but it's kind of hard to know how to start well, even if you're following along with the content that's in Trailhead. And then if you've done the Trailhead content, how can you continue to build those skills, and what skills should you be building? Who this session is for is really everyone. If you're a developer, awesome. Let's talk through some of the tools and the ways in which we use those tools here in the Salesforce platform that are declarative. If you're brand new to the platform, great. I'm really passionate about this and I want to talk you through it. And if you find yourself in the middle there, I think you'll find that this is a nice way to really kind of learn where you've been and where you should kind of focus and move into. So that's the who, the what, and the why. Now I want to talk about the kind of definitions of the roles. Now here you'll see that I've got administrator to automator, right? Now this is a spectrum in my opinion. They're not two different roles. I think that you begin as an administrator, and as you become more and more comfortable in the Salesforce platform, you can move toward automation as long as your business is open to it, and these are skills that you want to pick up. So I've listed here that it's a spectrum, right? It's not like you're one or the other, or if you become an automator, you can't administrate. Really, it's kind of a path or a journey that you can move on. Now, when we talk about the responsibilities of an administrator day to day, this is things like user provisioning. We're going to be building out reports and dashboards. Perhaps we're fixing data in our production instance. We'll probably be doing data loading with Apex Data Loader or some other ETL tools or ETL Lite tools. We'll probably be building page layouts and some pages using the app builder, and we're doing day-to-day user support, right? Typically, that's how we would define a production Salesforce administrator. Now, when we move into automation, we're kind of a cross between a business analyst and a light developer, right? So now we start focusing on collecting feature requests from our stakeholders, right? And we refer to our stakeholders here as the business. We start to document what those feature requests need, right? So we're putting requirements together so that we understand what it is that needs to be built. And then before we build anything, we have to start to design what those automations will be. So we need some familiarity with the way that the platform works. After we design and revise our solution, then we need to actually build it using tools on the platform. And from there, we need to test the work that we've built. And we want to do that in a safe way that won't negatively impact our production instance. Then we want to actually deploy those changes into production. And finally, we want to collect feedback from the users that we developed our application for. And we want to make sure that we're hearing from them, and any feedback that they're giving about bugs that we may have introduced, we want to fix those, of course. And we also want to make sure that we're listening to them to collect feedback on how we can improve the automations that we've already built. And that is a constant conversation. We never want that collection of user feedback to end. Right? So when I define an administrator or I define an automator, these are the things that I'm talking about. And we're going to look at how we can move from those administrator responsibilities over to the automation responsibilities. So I'd like to begin with some soft skills that I think are really, really valuable if we are trying to become an automator, right? Pardon my my messages. Okay, so let me see if I can actually knock those off. I don't want everyone to be distracted. I'll end up being distracted. Goodness gracious. Do not disturb. Thank you. So the very first thing that we want to do when we are automating is we want to focus on the needs. What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Right? That should really be our guiding principle. It's tempting Especially as we begin working in automation, we become very excited about the tools and the ways in which we can solve problems for the business, but that can cause us to steer away from the true business need. So when I put up that GIF of the genie and Aladdin asking, what do you need, over and over and over again, that's really the most important thing that you can do. You don't want to focus on a solution right off the bat. When you approach your business and you hear that they want something to happen, ask them what their needs are. Ask them what they're doing every day. And after you ask them the first time, ask them a second time, ask them a third time. Make sure that you're actually digging into details. Don't talk about solutions right up front. The second thing is we want to make sure that we are staying away from features and technology, right? You want to take the technology and throw it away. When you talk to your business, you want to make sure that you are asking them questions that are based on need and are based on requirements. It's all based on the use, right? So we want to focus on need. We want to stay away from technology. And then we want to make sure that we are frequently clear and frequently we want to make sure that we are clearly and frequently communicating, right? So it is one thing to interact with the business and ask them some questions. Cool, thank you very much. I rush off into my cubicle, I make a solution, some time passes, I come back, I hand that to my business, and they're very upset because actually it didn't serve their purposes, right? So when we talk about communication, this is consistent communication, right? We want to make sure that we're telling our stakeholders what's going on, and we have to recognize that their requirements can change over time. So these three things, they all pertain to the clarity issue of automating. We want to make sure that we are focusing on end user need. We want to make sure that we are not focusing on the technology or the solution early in the process. And we want to make sure that we have super clear communication and super frequent communication. Just want to check in for a second, make sure that there are no questions that have popped up in the Q&A. Fair. Okay, let's move forward. So let's talk a little bit about the next phase of soft skills, which I refer to as curiosity. Okay, so when we talk about curiosity, it's a piece of design thinking, right? It's how we approach crafting our solutions. So for me, the very first piece of curiosity is actually diversity, right? So it looks like my GIF hasn't fully loaded here, but you can see that we've got three very different entities holding hands. The idea is that when we are approaching a solution, we want to make sure that we are talking to more than one kind of person. And this applies in a whole bunch of different ways, right? So you could think about it as the roles within a company. If you're talking to various stakeholders and you're trying to build out an application, it's really important that we not only talk to the sales manager, who's going to be looking at dashboards and KPIs to kind of report on what's happening and see whether or not certain tactics or strategies are effective, but we also want to talk to the sales doer, right? That would be your salesperson, right? Perhaps there is some business development reps that are below the salesperson that are helping them out as well. We want to make sure that each one of those roles are reflected in the solution that we build. And if we focus only on the pigeon or only on the beetle, then we won't have a robust solution, and that's going to be a problem. I also think that this is an important time to mention diversity in terms of the representation of people that we're speaking with, making sure that we're talking to people that are the same as us and different than us, talking to people of all genders, all colors. This brings innovation and insight to our technology solutions, and many places can overlook the idea that they should talk to people of many different walks of life and many different perspectives as they're building out a solution. So do consider looking at not only various roles as you investigate what your solution should be, but also look at the various people and who they are, where they come from, and see what innovation they bring in their diversity of perspective. We also want to make sure that we can verify all of the things that we build, right? So we need to have something that we're measuring against. So as you see here, Oprah is juggling the Twitter verified symbols. We want to make sure that if we build an automation, it's actually tied to something that we can measure, that we can capture. If we are trying to build an application related to sales activities, we need to talk to that sales manager and say to them, how do you know that this is successful? What are you looking to measure? By how much? That by how much I think is really, really important. Oftentimes you'll get people that are excited about an automation They'll give you some requirements. You'll go and you'll build something. 6 or 8 months go by, and it's never been adopted. And they kind of just forgot about it, right? And in many cases, that's because they didn't have the verification that the solution worked in mind when that was built, right? So in terms of Salesforce, it's very easy to just think about what reports, what dashboards, what do you want to see at the end of the day after this automation is built? How do we know that it's actually going to be effective? And then after that, I think it's really important to talk about how we need to move on, right? So if we have an assumption or we have a piece of technology that we like a whole lot, that's cool. But if it doesn't actually fit the bill, then we need to let it go. I know that myself specifically, early on in my automation career, I was really excited about certain concepts and I clung to them really, really hard. And at the end of the day, it's less important that the idea I had initially is accepted. It's more important that I hear the perspective of the people around me and come up with great and innovative ideas that can help meet their needs. So if you've got an idea and it sounded great, but it's just not going to work, you got to let it go and you got to move on. All right, cool. So moving forward from there, let's talk a little bit about caution. Okay, so as Michael Jordan is saying here, stop it and get some help if you are building in production. The first mistake most automators make is they begin to try and streamline their workflow. They try and automate their business processes in a production environment. Don't do that. In each one of these slides, I have resources linked in the corners. I'll make this deck available after the fact, and people can actually click in and see resources that pertain to each one of the recommendations that I'm making. Building in production is just simply a non-starter. It's a thing that you need to stop doing if you're doing it right now, but if you haven't done it yet, never start. You should work in sandboxes, or if you're comfortable in the DX environment, you should work in DX. It is safe. It's going to prevent any kind of bug from being introduced to your production instance. And trust me, in the long run, it's going to serve you very, very well, right? When we make changes, we want to have that happen in a safe and segregated environment to prevent anything horrible from happening in our mission critical production instance. So number one is don't build in production. And number two is don't build something unless it's been asked for. When we start to explore tools and automations, it really can feel like the sky is the limit. There are a million things out there that we can automate, and that's very, very exciting. However, it's really important that we only build the things that our business needs. Now, if we have insight because we're close to the business and we've had conversations with the business, of course we can have a conversation with business stakeholders and see if they have some interest in something that we've observed. But we shouldn't be building something willy-nilly that people haven't asked for, right? It's not a good use of our time. It's not a good use of the technology. And more often than not, it's not going to receive good adoption. Now, if you get a sponsor to kind of back you up on some innovations that they're interested in seeing that are just kind of what we would call like a Black Ops or a Skunk Works, just an innovation kind of lab, well, fantastic. But again, it's tethered to the business somewhere, right? We want to make sure that we're not just creating technology for the sake of it, because it can be really exciting to make a flow or a process builder, but we shouldn't make those unless we actually need them. And in the name of humanity, stop deploying anything unless you have rigorously tested it and ensured that the end users have used it before it goes into production. Now, in the developer universe, we might be talking about regression testing, QA testing, user acceptance testing. But if we're moving from administration into automation, the thing that we need to recognize here is we need to verify that the stuff we build works, and we need to make sure that someone who's going to use it has used it in a test environment as though this was their day job, right? That's going to ensure that we're not introducing any bugs, and it's going to ensure that we aren't breaking any of the mission critical workflow that an end user has in that production instance. If you don't do this step, you should not deploy your solution or your automation, right? So do make sure that you're actually testing. And it's pretty easy. When you're going to test something, if you've got a field update, you want to test, hey, does it work when it's supposed to? Hey, does it do nothing when it's supposed to do nothing, right? That's a very simple example of both a positive and a negative test. Again, there are some resources linked in this slide. Then we move into the creativity aspect of building. So the very first thing that I'd say is get all of the whiteboards. I mentioned earlier that you should throw away the computer or the technology and not focus on that. Eventually, you need to start focusing on what your solution is going to do. My recommendation for your initial solutions is actually to write them out on paper or on a whiteboard or on a tablet, not build anything. You want to see what you're doing. You want to kind of revise what you're doing as you go. You want people in your team to see it. If you're on a team of one, have someone trusted, a coworker that you trust, have them take a look at it, just talk through some of those ideas. You really want to spend more time designing your solution than you think. And the reason for that is the more time we spend designing, the more errors in our thinking we catch. The more errors we catch in the design phase, the more time we save, because it's much easier to fix an error in thinking in the design than it is to change an automation that's been built in the wrong way, okay? So use whiteboards, spend a lot of time designing. From the design phase, I really think that you should present. Here we've got Obama saying, you're not supposed to be fans of me. You're supposed to be skeptics of me. You're supposed to ask me tough questions. And I really think that's the way that we should approach things. At Salesforce, when I've got to present something in front of a company, we have something called a dry run, where I present and the team in front of me, they are skeptical of the solution, right? And if they see something that doesn't quite work, they're going to push into it. This isn't the same as people being mean, of course. They're still kind. But it's important that we actually test the mettle of what we're doing. And the reason that we want to test those solutions is we want to make sure that we're actually developing something that's really, really good. And another way that I like to put this is, I can't put a text message together without making a spelling error. And if I can't put a text message together without a spelling error, how on earth could I trust myself to build or develop an entire application without making a mistake, right? So getting other people's eyes on it is absolutely critical. Now, this is a little bit easier when you've got a larger team, but as I mentioned earlier, if you've got a trusted coworker or colleague, or even a partner at home that's willing to kind of listen to you talk through the issue, you'd be surprised at how much can come out of it, right? And then after that, you need to throw away your work. So you develop something, right? You design a solution, and then you develop something, you put it in front of some folks and you say, hey, this is my idea, right? And then you get their feedback, you take that version 1 and you toss it in the trash. Now, you're going to harvest some ideas from that version 1 or V1, right? You're going to move into subsequent versions, but you need to be willing to let some of your previous work go. This actually makes us more efficient in the long run, in my opinion, rather than trying to hold on to an idea. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes you have to move on. The same thing applies to creativity. Sometimes an idea just ain't right, and maybe you can use it next time. Okay, so that concludes my perspective on our soft skills. I want to move into the hard skills. Just want to double check, do we have any questions that have popped up?
Got a couple of questions.
Okay, let's answer.
Cool, let's start from the beginning. So by Automator, is it more like an admin or a developer?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of in between, and we're about to get into the hard skills, and you're going to see how we're using a combination of tools within the platform that are declarative, like workflow rules, process builder, and flow. But now we're actually extending flow with tons of Apex and Lightning components. So for me, we start with those declarative tools, and then we can still continue on that spectrum.
Cool. Do you use Git or managed package?
So you can use Git and managed package as you're starting to put together flow templates. If you're trying to actually disseminate things to the broader community, that's not really a part of today's conversation, but it's absolutely a part of how you can get solutions out there to the broader kind of universe in Salesforce.
Yeah. We got one question, like, is Automator like a solution architect?
So for me, an Automator is, and I think it's really important here to note that in Salesforce, we have businesses of all sizes. We have teams of 1 that are supporting a business of 5 people, and we have teams of 400 that are supporting a business of thousands and thousands of people globally. right? And this content is applicable to both those small businesses and those enterprise businesses. So when I'm referring to an automator, I'm talking about a person who is moving from a traditional administrator position and starting to become more of an app developer through the mechanism of declarative tools primarily, and then expanding those using code.
Cool. Brian is asking, you said to ask, like, what do you need repeatedly? How do you ensure that the stakeholders actually say what they need versus what they think they need?
Yeah, so this is actually a fine line, right? We should be skeptical of our end users. To me, I think if you haven't asked them the same question 3 different times, then you haven't gotten the right answer. But at the same time, we have to be really careful. Sometimes the business is telling us what they want, right? So this is funny to say, but you have to start learning when you've really scraped the bottom of the barrel and you're not going to get anything else, because the end user can actually get quite frustrated at us if they feel like we just don't believe anything they say, or if they feel like they're being challenged.
Cool. We got another question. We have a very small team, 2 admins looking after 10,000 plus users. How do you build a business case to hire additional resources into the Salesforce team to ensure best practices with regards to development lifecycle? Deployment lifecycle. Sorry.
Yeah, so that goes to that kind of verification step that I talked about. Every effort that you're making in your 2-person team, you should be codifying and capturing exactly the value that it has given the business, right? If you make a single workflow rule, that workflow rule has actual monetary value. It saved someone some time, right? So the better reporting that we have, the better tracking of the things that we build, the better business case we can make, right? And then I can go to my manager, or I can go to my leader and I can say, look, we ran 13,000 automations over the last month and a half. We estimate that each automation saved X amount of time. This is the total amount of time that we spent, and you know, this is a conservative estimate of dollars that we're saving you. We think that we've earned a new employee.
Cool. Edward, I started in 2006 building on Salesforce. How do you think it has changed? And if you have been building for a long time, what do you recommend doing to refresh yourself?
Yeah, so I've been building on the platform a little bit later than that. So I started in like 2012, 2013. But even in the time that I've been building, I've seen a significant shift toward incredibly easy to use declarative tools. And I've really seen the Salesforce platform transition away from just a CRM and transition into a lightweight, medium weight, heavyweight app dev platform. Right? There's really a huge change in my opinion. It really is object-oriented development. In terms of getting your feet wet and kind of refreshing yourself, I think that there are a number of really fantastic resources available. I think Automation Hour is fantastic. I think Automation Hero or Automation Champion is fantastic. There are a lot of super great resources, blogs, the Wizard podcast or the Wizard videocast. All of those are really, really fantastic. They focus on actual business cases. Jen W. Lee, there are a number of people that you can follow on Twitter. Narendra Singh. These people are talking about actual business cases every day. Follow them, get your hands dirty, open up a developer org, and you're going to find, oh my goodness, this is actually of value.
We got another question. Do we have any tools out there that we can monitor the number of operations that run per day or per unit hour in our org?
Yeah, so for a long time, that's been kind of a, hey, do I need to run a kind of a custom solution for that? I am a little bit fuzzy on this, but I think that we're seeing increased monitoring capabilities coming out both in this release and the following release.
Cool. One last question. So do you use Field Trip to see what people are using?
So you can use Field, you can use Field, like, I recommend if we're talking about objects and fields, yeah, you want to use a tool like that. You know, regularly monitoring how much of your schema is actually being used is really important. Clearing out the things that you don't need is really important. So I'd say that as a part of your regular maintenance, I'd say spend 20 to 30% of your time if you can. If you can't, 10 to 15% of your time looking at those things that you previously built, getting rid of the stuff and deprecating the things that you don't need. The same thing would also apply to like manage packages and app exchange listings that you're just not using. Make sure that you clear those out of the org.
Yeah, I got a very interesting question from Heather. Like, you bring up all these resources, how to manager not to feel overwhelmed. I could spend 24/7 on Salesforce.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I wanted to do this session specifically was so that we narrow the scope, right? One of the challenges that many of my students have in our Pathfinder program is there's such an enormous amount of information. Where should I go? And every trailhead you go to, it links to 3 more trailheads, which link to 3 more trailheads, which link to 3 more trailheads, and it's crazy, right?
Wikipedia, like a Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's like Wikipedia, and you can keep going forever. So for me, we need to narrow in, right? So unless I need it, I'm not going to click on the link, right? And that's because I'm very goal focused, right? So here I'm bringing up ideas of soft skills that I need to develop. I want to focus on those, and you're going to see in a moment too that I'm going to focus on some hard skills. And in those hard skills, you're going to see there are resource links that you can click once you get a copy of the deck, and you can focus on those to start to see what it is that you need. Consider it a bare bones framework of how you can be an automator without drinking from the fire hose.
Cool. I think we covered all those questions. We can move on to the next.
Cool. Sharing my screen again. Great questions, everyone. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's look at the hard skills. And so we end at 10:40. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to move a little fast here, but that's okay. It's a primer, and there are resources in the links. So there are 3 tools that you really have access to as an automator. There's some nuance here, but the 3 primary tools are Workflow Rules, Process Builder, and Flow. I've given them ranks like they were superheroes here in terms of their speed, in terms of how they execute, how easy it is to interface with them, the actions that you can do with them, how robust they are, and then how easy it is to debug them. For me, we can have a conversation about how workflow rules are very, very, very fast, but very, very limited. But considering the recent changes we've seen in releases, and considering the question that just came up about limiting the scope, we need to focus on flow. Okay, flow is becoming just as fast as workflow rules in certain scenarios with our newest update. The interface is just as beautiful as anything we've released in Salesforce. There are more actions available in flow than anywhere else, and debugging isn't great, but it's better than the other tools. Talking a little bit about the limits that you need to focus on as you become an automator. We work in a shared platform. We have resources that are limited. And these are the 3 primary resources that we encounter as an automator. So we have SQL queries. These are queries against our database, obtaining information like field values or records. DML, which is database manipulation language, that's writing things to the database, saving new updates to the database. And then we have runtime elements, and those are the actual things that we drop onto the canvas in our flow editor. So SQL gets us records, DML, that will update our records in the database, and runtime elements, you multiply it by the number of records that you're processing. So out of them, here are your limits, right? This is a nice quick refresher. You can have 100 queries as you're running your flow. You can query 50,000 records, right, in getting them returned. DML, you've got 25 statements that you can make in a single transaction, and then you've got 10,000 records. And then in runtime elements, this is, to me, the biggest constraint or bottleneck. You only have 2,000 elements. So you have to take each element on your flow screen and multiply it by the number of elements, by the number of records that you're processing, and compare that to 2,000. If you exceed it, you're going to burn out the runtime elements limit. Next, I want to talk a little bit about variables. I find that when people are stepping into automation, they find variables to be challenging. Focus on variables. Flow Builder is now handling a lot of variables on our behalf, and that's fantastic, but you should still know what variables are. As we move away from Process Builder and move into Flow, a variable is a thing that can be remembered by the system to reference or manipulate at a later time. And they come in 3 main flavors. We have a variable, we have a record variable, and a record collection variable. Those are all stored within the flow for reference. A variable is a single field value or a single value we'd like to put in a field, like an opportunity amount. A record variable is all field values of a single record, right? Or those field values we'd prefer to grab. So this would be all field values of a single account. And then a record collection variable would be all field values of all cases. Real quick, nomenclature on naming them. As you create variables, you can name them. Of course, system-generated variables will have their own naming convention. This is a very quick view into how I name things. It's less important that you name things the way I do, and more important that you are consistent in how you name so that it is readable and understandable. Again, I'm going to make this deck available after the fact. And of course, I'm open to any conversations in Twitter, on LinkedIn, on the Trailblazer community about these naming conventions. Let's talk a little bit about loops. To me, the loop is the biggest hurdle to people that are entering the automation space. So the very first thing that we do is we read from a record collection variable. So remember, we talked about having a pile of records. In this case, we're going to talk about having a pile of accounts. Okay. The next thing that we need to do is we need to take a single one of those accounts and put it in a single record variable. So I had a pile of accounts. Now I have a single account. Now I can look at that single account and I can change things in it. For example, the account name. Once I change the name, I can assign those changed values to a totally new collection. So now that new collection has a single record. My old collection has all of the old records. And then this process repeats. So it's like cards in a deck. I take the second record, then the third record, and this continues until that loop completes. So for example, if this were accounts, I would grab the first account. That first account has a name of Jay's house. I take it, I transform the name of the account to Laren's house. Laren is my wife. Great, I take that account that has a name value of Laren's house, I add it to a new collection, and then I proceed to the next record in that collection. And the whole process repeats itself again. When it comes to maintenance, I think it's really important to bring up that when we look at validation rules, formula fields, and flows, it's very easy for us to hard code values. So here you'll see in a validation rule, a formula field, and a flow, each one of these has an amount of 1,000, right? It's hard coded in each one of those scenarios. And that's challenging because if I change one, I might forget to change the others. So instead of hard coding in each one of those areas, I should use a custom label, a custom setting, or a custom metadata type to create that amount value. I set it there, and then I point my validation rule, my formula field, or my flow over to it. And I'm actually able to reference those things directly in my validation rule, formula field, and flow, so that as the business changes their requirements, I change it in one single place. Now, Jen Lee has a fantastic breakdown of when to use custom labels, custom settings, custom metadata types, and that's linked in the resources here. Requirements change, save your sanity, never hard code. Just don't do it. Figure out what all of your values are and go out and build custom labels, custom settings, custom metadata types. Really quick, because I don't want to focus on Process Builder too much and time is coming here. If you're using Process Builder and you want it to perform well, and by well I mean recognizing that it's still slower than other solutions, only build one per object. Yes, really. Yes, really, really. You want to filter on your evaluation criteria, not on your action. Don't filter on your action. It takes a lot more computing power to filter on the action than it does on the evaluation. It's really going to boost your performance. Never hard code values, reference those custom settings, labels, or metadata types, and then null check everything. Make sure that any field reference that you have, you're filtering, saying, hey, if this is blank, never mind. When it comes to flow performance, look, flow is your friend. We're introducing a new before save flow trigger. This is really best for simple field updates, just like you would use in your workflow rules. Use it whenever you can, once it's out and available. It's got like a 10 times speed boost in performance. It's super valuable. We should all start using this anytime that we can, so far as I believe. This is me speaking as Jay Stedman, not me speaking on behalf of Salesforce. To me, use this, use this, use this. If you're using loops, make sure that you don't actually have SQL queries, get record elements within your loop, and make sure that you're not updating records to the database, saving DML statements within the loop. It's a very bad idea. When it comes to error handling, you'll see here in the lower right-hand corner of the box, there's a little fault path. and there is an action handling that error, flows aren't easy to debug. When something goes wrong, it's hard to know what goes wrong. So make sure that you're actually error handling. Again, there will be a link to how you can error handle. Again, focus on error handling. Every flow that you build, make sure that it has error handling. Save your sanity, use error handling. It'll help you the first time you've got a problem. Now, when it comes to extending flows with code, there's a whole website called Unofficial Salesforce that has a whole section called Unofficial Flow that is full of things called invocable methods or Apex actions, where you can take these things, download them into your org, and there are utilities that allow you to extend the power of flow. They're fantastic, and they let you get past some of the limitations that flow may have, as well as do some really, really interesting things. There are also some Lightning Web components that you can pull into and embed into your screen flows, which can make them beautiful and really, really performant. And the last thing that I'd say is if you want to get your hands dirty with Flow, on the App Exchange, there are actually Flow solutions. I've developed one in conjunction with Amnon Kruvy. You can find it, it's called Business Time on the App Exchange. It has a full Flow template that you can take a look at. It's very, very useful. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending the session. Thank you so much. I will make a version of this available. I'll probably post it to Twitter. You'll see all of the resources there. I know that we burned through that last half, but I hope that you found it helpful. Do reach out to me on Twitter. I'm very, very active there and happy to have conversations with any and all of you. Thank you very much.